New Zealand First will be very happy to support the bill as amended at this stage.
I was very keen to speak on this part of the bill because this is a particularly exciting part, but in particular it's actually subpart 2. Reprints, not retreads, Megan Woods, it's reprints that I'm talking about. And the reason that I'm quite excited about this is the capacity for the legislation to stay up to date with current drafting practice. Now, when I first arrived in Parliament, having a few years ago, I had completed my law degree at Canterbury University, and I did actually enrol for a particular component of my degree, and it was a course called legislation, and my university lecturer was one John Burrows, who went on to become, of course, an esteemed professor at our university, and then on to the Law Commission was his most recent role. And because of his influence, I believe that working in the Parliamentary Council Office was something that anyone with an interest in the law, a passion for the law, would be absolutely interested in and fascinated by, because he made the Parliamentary Council Office, the work of Parliamentary Council, sound so fascinating and so important. And when I arrived here, I didn't find colleagues that were quite of the same understanding of the fascination and the passion for the work of Parliamentary Council. But actually, having served then for 3 terms on a range of select committees, I actually did realise that these people were able to bring to bear a consistency in terms of the language that they used and the method for prescribing the law in a way that made sense right across a range of different laws. And they were all able to do that. I mean, we had some incredible Parliamentary Council officers, obviously from the top down, but right across the board there was this absolute commitment to what is now described in this legislation as current drafting practice. And there would be some challenges faced when legislation came before a select committee and it didn't meet that test of current drafting practice. And the one that I recall the most was actually a very early bill that was referred to the Justice and Law Reform Select Committee, which it was called in those days, and that was the Companies Bill. So it was a brand new piece of legislation. It had been the subject of a Law Commission report. The Law Commission had in fact drafted a bill, but the bill did not meet Parliamentary Council's current drafting practice to adopt the modern phraseology. And so as a result, the Justice Ministry issued drafting instructions to Parliamentary Council, and they completely redrafted the legislation. And I will never forget having sat at that select committee, listening to submission after submission after submission, all of them beginning with their particular theory as to why the Law Commission draft was different from the Ministry of Justice's draft. And there was theory after theory after theory as to why a particular phrase was used, why a particular section was drafted in a particular way. And so the debate at the Select Committee came about as a debate around the 2 different drafting styles and the different approaches that they represented, rather than a discussion about what our company law ought to look like. And I have to admit, and I think that colleagues on both sides of the House felt exactly the same way about how difficult this made our job as a select committee. And it really led me to the very strong view back in those early days that the Law Commission should in fact have the advantage of a direct delegation of someone from Parliamentary Council to the Law Commission when they were drafting bills. And then we would get the current drafting practice merged into the Law Commission's work, so that when they returned a bill to the minister would, with confidence, be able to introduce that bill to the House. So I'm very pleased, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, I'm very pleased to see an entire subpart of Part 2 devoted to this whole question of current drafting practice. Now, one of the frustrations that I have experienced over the many years that I've been here is when legislation is drafted in a format which is no longer representative of current drafting practice, and an amendment has to be made. And the number of times that Parliamentary Council have to kind of go through the existing legislation in order to sort of essentially upgrade it so that it is fit for purpose, which is to accept an amendment which Parliament is dealing with several years later. I believe that that frustration can be dealt with as a result of this subpart, which is actually why I'm very, very pleased to see it in the form that it is. And of course, there are simple editorial changes that can be dealt with at the time of a reprint, which actually make incredibly good sense. And so we can, for example, see language change to gender-neutral language so that we can refer to he or she instead of the word he. I mean, I remember all of those laws that existed for many, many years that only ever referred to he. And, I felt as a woman that these things never quite... I felt excluded. That's exactly the word I was looking for. Thank you, Mr Little. But sometimes I felt they ought to apply to me, and I felt definitely excluded. But now the words he or she can simply be replaced for the word he, and that enables the law to be updated in a sensible way. The word chairman may be changed to chairperson. I remember this is going to show how long I've been here. I remember the Honourable Sir Robert Muldoon actually debating in the House once, and he actually got a bit upset that somebody had been referring to the chair, and he in fact got up and gave a speech about how unfortunate it was that the previous speaker was only able to address an inanimate object that the chairman was sitting on. So he really wasn't quite up to date himself. And then the words Her Majesty the Queen may be changed to the Sovereign. Now, I actually think the fact that we're signalling this does suggest that, we're getting ready for the inevitable there. And I think the same thing happens when you refer to things like Queen's Counsel and they become King's Counsel over time and vice versa. So we have to make sure that our legislation is able to stay up to date in that regard. And then there are some simple changes that just reflect some sensible changes to the way that we use language, and sometimes there are simple spelling errors, there are errors in numbering, cross-referencing, any other errors of a similar nature. All of these can be tidied up in a very straightforward manner, and that is something that I think makes really good sense. So I believe that this is a helpful part of this legislation, this subpart in particular, I think, to embed current drafting practice, because of course the language always speaks to the present moment. So the definition means the legislative drafting practice for the time being used by the PCO, and that means that whatever the drafting practice is of that day, that is the definition that will apply and will enable our laws to remain of a particular standard. And that means that when one looks at a particular piece of legislation and another piece of legislation, the differences won't be there. They will in fact be drafted in the same way and meet the same tests, and that will ensure that people have a common understanding of what they mean. So I think that, again, this is an excellent bill. and this particular part I am pleased to see, and I know that people have sort of taken my comments as being somewhat facetious, but having the experience of sat on a variety of select committees and seeing the incredibly hard work that our Parliamentary Council bring to the task, I believe that these changes will assist them in the work that they do, and obviously in that regard assist the work of this House.
Call Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. It's a pleasure to take a call on the legislation bill. And, Mr Chairman, some of the comments from my colleagues and others in the House earlier